Hey, I'm Shaye Wanner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you are a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Alrighty, folks. Well, today I am here with Jason and Candice as well as Maika, and we are going to be talking a lot about diversified operations and specifically bookkeeping and some ways that we can make that a little easier on ourselves. Now, before we dive into the conversation, I do want to say Ambrook has set up my listeners with a pretty good deal where you can try 1 month of Ambrook for free at ambrook.com/casualcattle. And don't worry, that link is in the description as always. But I know you guys are more excited to listen to Jason and Candice and Maika than to hear me talk per usual. So let's kind of roll into that conversation. As we get started today, Jason and Candice, I want to start with you. The fun question for me and my listeners, but maybe not my guests, is always, why do you bet on the beef industry?
That's a great question. And at the root of it, it comes down for us is that we have the opportunity to be part of the less than 2% of the population that is feeding the rest. And it's such an honor and a privilege to be in the beef industry, in agriculture, to be generations of that, providing food and fiber and protein to a world that's hungry and needs us. It's an honor and a privilege.
So I was thinking about that question earlier, and the thing that I love about the beef industry is that we get to bring people enjoyment and delight with their nutrition, right? We're not just providing nutrition in a bottle. Here, take this and it will meet all your daily needs. People get to enjoy what we produce, and we get to interface on a regular basis with consumers, end users and consumers. We call them consumers, but they're people, right? And we live on both sides of the plate. We live on both sides of the feed bunk. That's kind of a new phrase that we came up with actually in preparing for this podcast, because we're growing the feed and we're feeding it. We're also, even in the feedlot or cattle production scenario, we're producing our own cattle from conception to the fork. And so it's just a lot of fun. And it's so important to be able to know when we cross that bull with that cow, and then in about 2.5 years, you get to see what that steak looks like. It's like, oh man, that was right. Let's do that again, several hundred times or maybe several thousand times, but now we've got to endure that 2.5 year span again. But we just love the beef industry. We love farming. We love cattle. We love the lifestyle. We love most things about it. But in the last few years, as our operation has diversified greatly, we have learned to love interfacing with the public, with consumers, with people that never have talked to a beef producer, never have talked to a rancher, don't have a clue what alfalfa looks like, don't have a clue what Bermuda grass or a bale of hay looks like, and they darn sure don't know what Wagyu is. They really don't know what Angus is. They don't know what a vaccine is. So anyway, we just have gotten to where we love bringing joy, bringing delight and enjoyment to people as we provide them nutrition, and then also as they get to know the faces behind agriculture. And anyway, I'll quit there for now.
Well, I think those were both amazing answers. And Maika, you are joining us from the Ambrook team, so I also want to hear your response to that question as far as why you bet on the beef industry.
Yeah, absolutely. No, appreciate the question. I cannot claim I have nearly the ag roots and background that Jason and Candice have, and I am very, very fortunate to have been a guest on their property and their ranch and to actually see and touch alfalfa for the first time. I knew what it looked like, to be fair, but I was absolutely missing that connection, right? And my background prior to Ambrook was not ag, but it was food supply chain. I worked for several years building software for long haul truck drivers, moved from that to produce distribution and independent grocery. So kind of was along that supply chain and found Ambrook and found ag. And I don't know if I can ever go back at this point. I mean, just so wonderful to be at the root of it, working with producers. And to answer your question directly, I bet on the beef industry, and I'd say U.S. ag more broadly, because it's pretty simply foundational to our national security. I take a little bit more of a broad view of it just because, tariffs have been on the mind the past, few weeks and months. And, doing my research, I have found that, for the first time in 2023, we as a country became a net ag importer. And the first time in modern history. And that is really scary. There's a lot of supply chain fragility out there. I think about supply chain all the time and have since I graduated school and started working in supply chain technology. And the beef industry is a highly nutrient dense and really special component of that, like cornerstone of that industry. It scares me to think that, we might have a fragile ecosystem and supply chain when it comes to something as critical as food. And, betting on folks like Jason and Candice and being able to support their businesses as they grow and kind of weather the craziness of the macroeconomic is just personally also really important to me, coming from like a small business background, watching my family kind of weather similar things in a totally different industry. So I find it to be a very personal thing. It really is not just about economics, it's about resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jason and Candice, I want to hear, we're going to do this a little backwards, and I want to hear what all you have going on in your operation today, and then I want you to tell me where you started. So what are all the entities you kind of have going on today?
We're growing forage crops, and basically every crop we're growing on our irrigated farm here in Southeast Arizona. We're right in the pocket, Southeast Arizona, right up against southwestern New Mexico and not very far off the old Mexico border. And so we are an irrigated farm. We're producing alfalfa, oat hay, ryegrass, different Sudan, different forages, whatever we can utilize in our rations. We have grown corn at times, and actually we're set up to grow corn, but when I can buy corn cheaper than I can grow it, then we buy corn instead of grow it. And so we support our local farmers in that way. And then I don't know, about 15 years ago, I told Candice that my dream was to walk all of our feed off the farm and sell it all in cattle. And so at the time I actually said in cattle trucks, thinking, bigger picture, selling all the cattle in terms of as feeders, that kind of thing. Well, now we actually walk all of our feed off the farm largely as fat cattle, and that's rare for Southeast Arizona. There's actually nobody else that does that right here within 150 miles of us. And so and we do a lot of custom feeding also, so we walk a lot of feed off the farm in regular cattle trucks as feeders that way. But we have gone from alfalfa in a row crop farm and running yearlings and stockers in the winter on kind of a wheat pasture operation that the rest of the world would recognize, to basically now the feeding operation has grown to where we're more of a feeding operation that the farm is supporting the feeding operation. Candice is selling beef, and the white barn beef aspect has grown to the point where it's a major component of our operation. And so now we're actually doing more to feed the beef business. So anyway, what other aspects do we have in our operation that I missed out?
Yeah, so the farming, the ranching, the feedlot, and then the beef direct to consumer, our own beef business, and then we also are supplying beef to others that are doing what we're doing.
And so, Jason, you said you started with kind of like a yearling stocker operation?
Yeah, so 20 years ago or so, we were growing row crops, cotton, chili peppers, which I know is a little bit different from what a lot of your listeners will be familiar with, but it's kind of a Southwest and Mexico type deal. And then corn, we grow really, really good corn. We're at about 4,000 feet elevation, and so we're not the low desert like Phoenix or Tucson where it gets really hot. So we grow really good corn here. We grow really good cotton. We grow quite a few different crops. But anyway, the challenge is we're pumping groundwater irrigation, and so in order to be profitable, you have to have cheaper fertilizer than we have right now, and you have to have better prices than we have right now. And so through the years, as we have adjusted what we were growing, we always found a way to graze whether it was corn stalks, cotton stalks, chili stalks, residue in the wintertime. So we would buy those fall calves and sell spring yearlings like many other operations. And then we got to where we just started feeding those calves and finishing and just doing different things, selling truckloads of fats or selling trailer loads of fats to other beef businesses, and then of course our own beef business as that's grown. So yeah.
So when you think about all those pivots or additions to your operation, how did you decide that that is the next step for you, or that you wanted to take on that different enterprise?
Both families are generational farm families. Lots of chili in the history of our both families, and so that's what we got started. And it's a high risk crop. It paid well and everything went right, but when it didn't, it was hard financially. And when we were first married, we were farming Jason's grandparents' place, and then his granddad ended up selling it. At that time, there was just no land to lease, and so we spent a couple of years with my parents kind of farming, getting into the hay side of things. We hadn't been really into the hay, so we were kind of transitioning into the alfalfa hay. And then in 2011, we were able to buy this place where we're at now. But it was set up for cattle. Because we were in the hay, we leased a little feedlot. This was before kids, so it was just Jason and I. We leased a little feedlot, bought a little bunch of cows, heifers and steers in like November, yeah. October, November. And like literally we're like hand feeding hay to
not hand feeding, we were using a pitchfork.
Yeah. Yeah. And to these heifers and steers, and just trying to utilize rained on hay that there was no market for. And so that literally got us into that was our first feeding operation. It was just the two of us. It was a lot of work, it was a lot of fun. And then
I thought it was a lot of fun. She thought it was a lot of work.
It was fun. When we bought this place, it was kind of set up for cattle, and the fields were already fenced, and they weren't doing a whole lot with it. And then when we moved over here, we still grew chili for a couple of years, but then disease kind of set in, labor prices got sky high, and the price had to change, for what we were getting paid for it. And it's like, we can't keep doing this, we got to transition. And so Jason started building feeding pens and bunks. And so we just, because of changes in the chili industry, it just kind of shifted and moved us more and more towards the cattle side. And then instead of just having cattle during the winter and farming during, spring and summer and fall, we started having cattle year round. And people were bringing us their cattle, and every transition hadn't been fast necessarily, but market prices, growing issues, risks, stuff kind of moved us more towards the cattle. And now, I told Jason, everything revolves around the cattle, not the farm. Before, everything revolved around the farm, and the cattle were addition, but now everything revolves around cattle, feeding cattle, whether it's our own or customers' cattle.
Well, and we built the first feed pen that it's right out this office window, and a neighbor, we put our own calves in it, and a neighbor showed up and he's like, "Hey, can you feed my calves too?" He's like, "Well, sure, we'll build one more feed pen." So we built a feed pen right beside that, and then another neighbor showed up, "Hey, can you take my calves this fall?" And actually that was a summer, and it was a typical dry Arizona summer. And so I'm like, "Sure, give me time, we'll build one more pen real quick, give us a few, I don't know, a couple, 3 weeks." And so we threw up another pen, and either that fall or the next fall, a ranch that you had a couple thousand calves was like, "Hey, can you take all of our calves this fall?" We're like, "Yeah, you bet. Give us a minute and we'll build the pen space for that." And so anyway, that's how our feedlot originally started. Was we were just going to feed a few hundred calves, and then all of a sudden it was, "Hey, can you do this? Can you do?" "Yeah, sure, you bet."
Jason doesn't say no either. So.
Of course not.
So there's a common thread I see when I interview guests and we're talking about diversifying operations. That's risk management, that's looking for the opportunity, if it's a profitability thing, whatever it may be. But in that, because I'm on a diverse operation now, I understand how hectic and wild it can be sometimes. So what did the bookkeeping aspect of that look like for you guys as you continued to grow and add on more entities? Because sometimes we like to add things on, but if we don't know if they're profitable, they might not be serving us. So what did that bookkeeping aspect look like for you guys?
Well, as we grew and got more diversified and using the system we were, like, nothing was separated. You didn't know which aspect was the feeding, what was bringing in money versus the farm. Nothing was really separated and very clear on what was doing well, maybe what wasn't doing well, and needed to be cut out. You couldn't open it up, look at your numbers, and know exactly where you were. Like, it's almost, you had to send it to our accountant, and say, "All right, what are my books showing me?" Like, are we doing okay, or where are we at? Because it's just really set up more for accountants than simple people like myself to be able to quickly just look at the numbers and know exactly how we're doing, where we're at. It was complicated and not user friendly, right?
Well, I'm back in the old days of, just of row crop farming and, some alfalfa and that kind of stuff. Well, it was no big deal. And even, let's say with the banker, the bank knew what we were doing, buying calves in the fall and selling them in the spring. And so we were just using basically our farming operating line. And so our line of credit. And so anyway, it's no big deal. And then as things grew and grew, and then, you're doing a lot more cattle business. And so we'd get a line for the cattle, or we'd do something that was a little bit different. But it was just, before long, you kind of have this monstrosity that really you're sharing money across all these entities, and you're sharing risk across all these entities, and you don't really know exactly what's doing what, where the burn is, where the gain is, and all that. And then too, we failed to mention the trucking. We were in the trucking for several years, I guess 10 or 12 years. And then once we really got into Ambrook, and well, I guess that might take us into that. But anyway, Ambrook really helped us see that the trucking was a good thing for us to get rid of, because it was really a drag on our operation.
So with Ambrook, what are some of those features that were different compared to maybe other programs or systems you were using before that made it easier for you to have that full picture view of the financials of your different enterprises?
Well, one that was it's easy. They made it easy to separate out the different enterprises. So now we've got White Barn Beef, White Barn Hay and Cattle. The hay and cattle, we had White Barn Feeders, but it was just, we were splitting hairs too much. They're just too tied together. And then we had White Barn Trucking, which we just got rid of. But to be able just to click on each one and look at your analytics and even your monthly income and expenses, is broke down so nicely, and you can see what you're spending. We compare that to our yearly budget that we put together for the banker, and so that's been super helpful for us too, even going back and reviewing and looking at everything and just kind of see where you're at month to month, how much money each month demands, expenses, income, and it's just a very clear picture. Like, I can just go into White Barn Hay and Cattle, and then even that, it's even separated out, like for farm product sales versus cattle sales versus buying feed, just those little things that are separated within hay and cattle. Yeah, the tagging is so simple and so clear and concise. It's just easy to get everything correct and where it needs to be.
Awesome. Maika, from your perspective, what changes have you seen with all the White Barn enterprises since you started working with Jason and Candice?
Yeah, let's go back to August 2022 when we had our very first video call. I don't know if you all remember that, Jason and Candice, but we were both had like really grainy video, and we were trying to communicate about kind of like the current state of things. And I was trying to explain, this vision that like Ambrook had about like how we could make farm finance a lot simpler, how QuickBooks just didn't do the job for a lot of people, and maybe spreadsheets, people grew out of them. But most of all, what I wanted to understand was how you all worked and what your hopes and dreams were and what your experience was. Because again, I didn't have an ag background. So the best thing that I could do was shut up and listen and better understand what you all were trying to do, and see if I and the team could help build a tool that got you to that place. And, since then, I think I'm pretty sure I've visited you 4 times. I can only find 3 on my calendar, but it feels like 4. And you might have maybe realized this back then, but we didn't say it outright. You were one of our first few customers. Now we have a few thousand. We're just a totally different business than we were back then. But one thing that I learned from spending all that time with you all is this feedback loop of getting to sit down with your customer and understand what they do and why they do it. It helps you just build a better product, right? And through that process, I have also witnessed your evolution of business. It was myself, and I believe it was Mackenzie as well, potentially Dan or some other team member. I remember sitting down, and we all just immediately got the sense that you're both so entrepreneurial, and you are able to balance so much all at once. And I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit, Candice, when you say that you referred to yourself as simple. I know you're being tongue in cheek, but the amount I remember walking into your office and sitting down behind you and watching you navigate QuickBooks Desktop, and you knew that interface really well. You knew what you were doing. You were super comfortable within it. And yet, at the same time, you were able to admit it wasn't meeting your needs for your business that was changing year over year. And going from that to developing Ambrook alongside you, bringing you fully onto Ambrook, going through the process of splitting out into your 5 different entities, was it 6, and then removing one, like all this like expansion and contraction that we did together as we figured out the right tool and the right shape of business. That was really a privilege. And to have you all come and speak to our team, earlier this year about the progress and the clarity that you've been able to receive, not just from Ambrook. Sure, I'm really happy to have played a part and that our team has been able to help in that way, but also just from your continued entrepreneurial nature and like your willingness to try things and to cut things out when they're not working. I have seen a consistency in that entrepreneurial mindset, and also a really huge evolution in how you run your business and how you're able to adapt much quicker than perhaps like way back when you had to give up Chili's, right? And it's very cool to be been part of that journey.
Well, what an honor and privilege that you chose us to be one of your first and to step into that and spend 3 days in my little tiny office with us. Oh, yeah, and going through all that stuff. But that's the other thing too. When you have clarity of your numbers and what each enterprise is doing, it's no longer an emotional decision. It's just like, okay, this is just what it is, Like with the trucks, just sitting down, like, I think this is a drag. This is something we need to just cut loose and turn loose of. It is an emotional thing when you own your own business and you're trying to do these things and to have to let go of something and just like, this isn't working. But to sit down with the numbers instead of just with the emotion and make a very informed decision and the clarity of it. Yeah, Ambrook, there's no going back to anything.
And I'm kind of a spreadsheet nerd. I love spreadsheets, and I liked some of I would take the QuickBook numbers and then I would put them on my spreadsheets for my budgets and my, tracking all the stuff that I wanted to track. But ever since that, like now with Ambrook, and honestly now Candice does it all. Recently, I needed to know something to make a pivot decision, right? And I said, all right, Candice, show me the numbers. Where do you find that in Ambrook? And like in 2 seconds, she was there, and boom, and it supported what we were doing. I was like, okay, well, let's keep going the direction we are. And so it was really cool because we didn't have to wonder, and we didn't have to dig, and we didn't have to accumulate numbers and transpose and all that stuff. We didn't have to even respire or respire.
I love to hear that so much. I personally, and from speaking with hundreds of customers and prospective customers, I respect the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is powerful. There's a reason so many people use a spreadsheet. And what's funny, Jason, we asked you to send us all of your spreadsheets, and we did that with a range of early customers because we wanted to bring the best parts of a spreadsheet into Ambrook. The pieces where you can feel like it represents you, that it's customizable, that it's responsive, that it's easy to navigate. And then at the same time, we wanted to remove the pieces that are, whoa, I dragged something all the way across and everything's wrong, or I, made a mistake and hard coded this thing. There's this balance that we are to this day trying to maintain. And so much of it is inspired by folks like yourselves who are like, I do this here and it works pretty well for me. Like, how do you compete with a spreadsheet? You got to try to model yourself after the best parts, right?
Yeah.
So, Candice, you used the word clarity when you were talking about, getting that picture of the full picture of your operation. How else did it feel to finally have that full financial picture as business owners?
Probably empowering, right? There's no guessing and wondering. And then when you do sit down with our lender, our bank, and it's just so easy to share those numbers with them, to show them, we're on the right track, we're headed in the right direction. But it's
the challenging part in a diversified operation that there are thousands of people that are going to listen to this podcast. They're going to say, man, like, we can make our numbers show what we want them to show, right? We can manipulate this operation to make this operation look better, this entity to make this entity look better. But when you really get to the bottom of it, like everything has to be profiting, right? And let's get rid of what's not profitable. And that's what the clarity of Ambrook, because even in QuickBooks with different things, different entities, or even with my spreadsheets, like you say, the hard coding, the foundations and the underlying values on different things, like it's so important to know the truth. And in today's, things just keep getting more and more expensive, right? And our risk level just keeps ratcheting higher and higher and higher. And we're having the time of our lives, but at the same time, we're having the risk of our lives. And all of agriculture, all of business is, but it's just so nice to be able to just like, okay, let's take 10 minutes and see where each entity is right now today. Actually, when I came in the office and Candice had Ambrook up on the computer and it showed our accounts receivable, and I was like, okay, how much of that accounts receivable can we get in like right now? Because it's a pretty large number, and honestly, it's our accounts receivable, and probably a lot of people's accounts receivable are way bigger than we recognize that they are. And so she started boom, 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 breaking it down and taking me to different invoices and different things in there that, this one will be coming in, or these people have been slow and all that. But just the clarity of knowing exactly where we're at, and instead of losing sleep at night and not knowing where we're at, and then it does come into a huge mental health issue, right? I mean, I know that's the buzzword of our day, but it's so real. The clarity that Ambrook has helped give us, like, has brought us so much peace of mind. And so it's a huge factor as well.
And now, remind me, I have had an Ambrook demo, but entering stuff can be as simple as taking a picture of a receipt correctly, and then the technology can kind of read what's on that receipt, and AI will almost itemize it for you. You just have to assign a few tags.
You use Ambrook more than I do. I'm kidding. I probably do use it use it pretty much every day. But that's exactly right. There's different kind of uses for Ambrook, right? At the very base, there's get your things together for your tax filing. You have to file your taxes every year, make sure everything's categorized properly, make sure you can generate a Schedule F, all that good stuff. And so that's the majority of the population. Super busy, needs to get that done. Some people do it in a 2-week coffee-fueled nightmare, as one of my customers referred to it, at the end of the year. And we've built a bunch of tools for that set of people. I think one of the most powerful ones that we've rolled out recently is around receipt management, being able to dump up to 100 receipts, pictures of receipts at a time, into Ambrook, and having Ambrook read all the line items on those receipts and transcribe them into line items, and then suggest a match between that receipt and the payment coming down your ledger. Saves people a ton of time. And what we always say is, look, sometimes you just won't have time for bookkeeping. We get it. What if you could just dump it all in there in your digital filing cabinet and come back to it and have it be more organized than before? Like, is that a thoughtful compromise? All you have to do is use your phone camera, right? And so, I'm going to admit, not everyone is as, advanced as Jason and Candice in terms of what they're looking at in the day-to-day and like the types of enterprises and entities that they have to manage across the board. And so we really do try to meet everyone where they're at. And, if you just want to make that scramble for tax filing less stressful and also make sure that you are representing your full like expense burden, we got something for you. If you want to know your field level, acre level profitability, your per unit profitability, like Jason and Candice might, we got something for you as well. And so we try to walk that line, between what is extremely useful and what will help you up level yourself.
So, Jason and Candice, what advice do you have for other ranchers out there who want to gain that clarity and become more organized on their finances?
So a little backstory, when Maika and Candice and I had that first Zoom call in August of 2022, that was a stage of life, and maybe for everybody, I don't know, but we were just like overloaded. We were maxed out. I hate the word overwhelmed, but you might throw that in there too. But there was just a lot going on, and I was kind of to the point I was like, I don't think we need to take another step on another startup, kind of a new business deal. And then, we had that Zoom meeting with Maika, and she was so sweet, and she had such great questions, and she wanted to know about us and our operation and how they could help us, what they could build that would help farmers and ranchers. And then Candice is like, I'm in. And so I was like, okay, all right, I guess I'll drag my feet along. And this, seriously, in our farming, ranching, feeding, and beef business enterprise, this is the one decision that I am so glad we made and have gone this way. And it has been a lot of work. It's been a lot of work for Maika and Mackenzie and the whole team and Dan, but it has been the ROI of that time expenditure has been incredible, and it's so well worth it. And I know that the team has the onboarding, way simpler than it was, because literally they were building the system with us, which was so awesome, and we're so glad to be a part of it. It was so cool. But I strongly recommend anyone in agriculture, and we do tell people all the time, find a way to get Ambrook, and don't let the costs scare you off, because the cost is whatever the cost is. I don't even know what it is. That's how much it matters. Like, don't even worry about how much it is, because it's just going to be another cost that's gone that brought you incredible value. The thing I would say, in addition to that, if I can, the first time that Maika and Mackenzie and Dan came to visit us, we were walking, I believe we were in a cornfield. We may have been in an alfalfa field. And Mackenzie, she said, Jason, how do you make the decisions for what you're deciding to do every day? And she didn't want to know what the decisions were, or what was going to happen in 6 months. She wanted to understand the thought processes behind the decisions. And I've never forgotten that she asked that question. That question alone has given me lots of pause over the years since then, because it's such an important question. And as Mackenzie's heart and mind were building this, she really wanted to know how we think as farmers and ranchers and how we're making decisions. And so that's what's behind Ambrook, is Mackenzie's heart of how do you make these decisions. Anyway, that's who Ambrook is.
Well, there are absolutely so many decisions that farmers and ranchers make every single day. I mean, we talk about decision fatigue as business owners, but I think sometimes it goes to a whole new level when we're talking about diversified operations. So that was a very insightful question from someone from the Ambrook team, and one we should all think about, everyone who's listening.
So back to your question, how do you become more organized? Having Ambrook is they're part of our team, is how we see using Ambrook. Their customer service is better than anything I've ever experienced. And I tease Jason sometimes on some of the stuff he has, too bad you don't have Ambrook on your team on different aspects that we use. But it really is a team, and like Jason said, whatever it costs doesn't matter, because it's cheaper than having an employee bookkeeper, because I do all the books for everything. So having that team, but I try to sit down every day and just do a little bit of bookkeeping and tagging and all the stuff. And then Ambrook has set it up really, really nice, where you've got you can automate tags, so things come in that are repeatable. It's already tagging it for you, so you don't ever have to touch that again. But yeah, getting Ambrook on your team, their software is phenomenal. Their customer service is they're outrageous. And you're right, Jason, just being able to not wonder and guess and stress about where you are financially, but just having that clear picture. And then when you do have to have conversations with your banker, it's just so much easier and less stressful.
So we've talked about your operation, we've talked about Ambrook, and we've talked about the challenges that come with being diversified operators. But what do you two enjoy the most about being diversified and so entrepreneurial?
Yeah, so Jason and I have been married 21 years, and farming, and then cattle, and then the ranch and everything. But where we're at now, I told Jason, we got perspectives from both sides of the feed bunk. as feeding our own cattle or raising our own cattle, feeding them, and then also feeding other people's cattle and seeing what they're doing. And then also, especially when we've stepped into the direct-to-consumer beef business, getting to talk to people and connect people back to the farm and ranch and having vocabulary and ways to communicate that with people and inviting them out here to see what we do, what the farm looks like, the feedlot, the cattle, the health. That's been super fun. We're not a traditional cow-calf operation where you sell your calves, when you wean them, you sell them and they're gone. We see what our genetics are doing, how they perform start to finish, what our vaccination program is doing, our health, the whole thing, and so we can constantly adjust and make things better. We get feedback from our customers, what they like, what they're not, on the beef side of things. So it's such a unique opportunity. And even the hay, like, we're not just putting alfalfa in a bale and selling it, like, we're feeding that. So everything has to be done right because we know what that end product is doing and how it affects the nutrition and how the cattle perform. So just a pretty, to us, we feel like it's a pretty unique situation where we basically use everything. We don't sell a whole lot. We use all the products we produce, whether it's hay, whether it's beef, and then also being able to bring in other people's cattle and seeing how they perform and what they're doing. And so the different perspectives that we have all around.
And one of our favorite things with our diversified operation is being able to build confidence in so many different people about agriculture, because one of our slogans is know your rancher, know your beef. And when people meet us, they meet our family, our daughters Hayden and Hannah, 15 and 13, or almost 15 and 13, they're like the main salespeople in our deal. They are incredible. They're a huge part of our operation. And our little 5-year-old Ethan, yeah, he's the little patron, they call him. So the little boss. But everybody people see our family and they feel safe to ask us questions. We're inviting, we're not defensive about what's happening in agriculture. We try to encourage conversations. And so our attitude is to share agriculture, share our operation with the world, share our life with people, with the world, and not try and hide it, because everyone in agriculture is either building confidence in everyone in agriculture or they're destroying confidence in everyone in agriculture. We're either doing stuff that's good for the beef industry or we're doing stuff that's bad for the beef industry. We're doing stuff that's good for farming, we're doing stuff that's bad for farming. And we all have a spotlight on us, even from inside our own homes. We want to create operations and be a family that encourages the next generation to take over and keep producing food and fiber and feed for the world. But if we don't do that, transparently and in a way that builds and grows relationships, well, when the kids leave and don't want to come back, well, in essence, we failed. And that's a loss, because we have so many young people. Like, it's so cool that you're multi-generational back on the family ranch, right, Shaye? And that's what we are. And even though we have our own operation, it's not like the operation is generational, but we are generational. And we want to give our kids an opportunity to create their own businesses. We're not going to hand them a business, but we want them to be entrepreneurs, and we want them to go and create their own businesses. Even if they do, take some of what we've done and carry it on, we don't want them to just say, well, this is what was handed to me, and so I really don't understand, and I really, this is what I was handed. That's the way that I was raised, was like, you need to go make your own. My granddad especially, he said, I'm going to give you opportunities and I'm going to teach you how to go be your own business. And we weren't handed anything. We were handed opportunity, and we were handed the ability to learn and grow. And so that's what we want to hand off. And so we want to build confidence in the next generation. We want to build confidence with consumers. It's all about building confidence. Trust is the only thing we have to sell when it gets down to it.
Absolutely. Well, my final question as we wrap up is, if you could go back to your first 5 years, what would you do differently?
When we got married, that was 2004, and I was already farming when we got married, but I wasn't using QuickBooks yet. But I bought QuickBooks and I put it on the computer, and I'm the one that set it up. And Candice was like, I really don't want to do this. so anyway, if we could go back and have Ambrook
Oh.
back there at the very beginning.
Oh.
That's what I would
Yeah.
change.
All right. Well, Jason and Candice, if people want to learn more about your operation and your story, where can they go?
They can go to whitebarnwagyu.com and you'll see pictures of our family, of our farm, and kind of learn about our operation. And that's really focused on the beef, but it's us in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, folks, remember, if you want to give Ambrook a try, you get 1 free month by going to ambrook.com/casual cattle. And I will include a link to that, as well as a link to Jason and Candice's website, all in the descriptions and show notes. With that, remember the best way to support this podcast and your other favorite podcasts is to leave a rating or review and share with a friend. But with that, happy ranching, folks.